Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and this time you made me watch The Greatest Showman, the musical, of course, that came out in 2017. Has it been that long already? Goodness, starring Hugh Jackman as P.T. Barnum in a movie that takes great creative license with the historical events and characterization of this guy. Of course, P.T. Barnum in the 1800s started a circus. He started a museum and then a tent circus, and was known for exploiting freaks, undesirable people, for his own gain, depending on how you want to look at it. The movie has a different spin on that from what a lot of people in history tended to. Here the idea is that Barnum was giving a lot of people who everyone wanted to ignore, and people who were, really low on the totem pole as far as social class goes, a chance when the rest of the world wouldn't. And there is in this movie a little bit of a question of how much he was actually exploiting these people, and how much he was hoodwinking his audience, and how much he really related to them. And that is, I guess I'm immediately jumping into review. That's the thing that I thought the film could have handled a little bit more nuance, a little bit more finesse. At the end of the day, it seems to be he really does relate to these people, but the prospect of fame and fortune got in the way, so his heart starts in the right place at the beginning, and then as time goes on, he stops, maybe stops looking at his new family that he's developed with these misfits, the bearded lady and the general little person, etc., etc. He stops looking at them as equals, or he just sees them as in his way, and he really does still see them as the same as him, but he cares at that point a lot more about his reputation. This version of P.T. Barnum is a complete reinvention in my mind from what little I know about the character in history, and he is certainly a sympathetic fictional character, but this is one of those. I wouldn't even call it quite a biopic, of course, but this is one of those historical fictions that you have to take more on the terms of the fiction itself, and it's up to each individual person how much they're okay with the creative license that this is taking. But for me, coming into a thing like this, I don't care, as I've always said, about how historically accurate it is, as I do about whether it makes me care about this protagonist in a fiction, and as long as it's presenting itself as a total fiction, not pretending like this is exactly the way things were, and acting like it's almost a documentary or something, or a fully true-to-life biopic, I'm much more okay with it. I understand people's irritation and even anger at a thing like this, or something like Saving Mr. Banks, where these things themselves feel kind of exploitative, where we take a character and we kind of take some of their flaws and their teeth away, and we make them much more stomachable in order to create something more mainstream. And the worry is that we forget about the mistakes they made and the kind of people they really were, and we try to create an idealized version of a character who wasn't actually really that great of a person, like we kind of did with Walt Disney in that movie, or with Barnum in this. It doesn't bother me as much as long as we can continue to have a sense of historical perspective and not watch these things as if we're reading history books. That's where I tend to come down on that. Having said that, I do think how extremely mainstream this film is maybe a little bit of a problem, even just taking it on its own terms, because it's a movie about marching to the beat of your own drum and being your own person, and not worrying about what others think about you. And it's really strange to have this anachronism, which honestly, personally, I think I don't care for. Like, on paper, I guess I don't mind it, but in practice, like, I was hesitant about it, and this is one of the reasons I never saw this movie. And in practice, I didn't love it. So we have this anachronism of the look and flavor of this time period, of course, it's ultra stylized. It looks like a Broadway play, and I like how stage-ish this movie looks, by the way, with the exception, of course, of CG animals, and I understand why you have to do some of that, particularly with the elephants and stuff. There's not a whole lot of that, but especially toward the end, the movie ends up getting a little bit special effects heavy, takes me out a little bit, but overall I really enjoy things like when the family is on the roof at the beginning, when they're in the typical kind of down and out period, where P.T. Barnum is trying to figure out a way to make a buck, and ultimately he ends up starting this museum. He and his family are talking and playing on top of a roof. It reminds me a lot of the chimney sweep stuff in Mary Poppins, and it looks like matte paintings in the background. Like, I'm sure that stuff is all done in a computer, but it doesn't look real, and it's not trying at all to look real. It looks like you could reach out and touch that background, and I really appreciate those kinds of production values for a thing like this. It's real old school. But the anachronism that I was talking about is it looks like a musical, and it's the 1800s, but the soundtrack is all modern, kind of auto-tune, repetitive pop music. And some of it is a taste issue for me. I just don't care for that stuff. I haven't listened to the radio in a lot of years because so much of it sounds like that. And it's not challenging enough to me. It's not, and I shouldn't say that because that makes me kind of a hypocrite, because I guess I like all kinds of music that I don't know if I could call challenging. I don't know if that's fair. Some of it's what you grew up with, of course. So, like, I like a lot of 90s rock that is certainly somewhat repetitive and not especially challenging. That's maybe not fair, but this kind of music just pushes my limits a little bit too much. There's not enough going on. The melodies themselves are too few notes very often to me, and it all sounds too overproduced and too manufactured. So, like, I can appreciate some parts of a song that are done synthesized or in a computer, but I need something real to grab onto. And when you have an auto-tuned voice, and I'm sure somebody in the comments is going to come out and be like, Cap, they didn't auto-tune anything in this movie. I mean, I've not looked this up. I'm going to assume that they did, but even if not, it sounds that way to me, so my point stands. Nothing about this music sounds real to me, at least a lot of it, and I just don't care for this kind of music in general. But I also think that it's strange that with this message of tolerance and inclusivity, it's kind of interesting, and it's not too generic of that message, by the way. I think that works on a couple of different levels, where it's about that on a really personal level, at the same time as it's about that more broadly. It's like, here are the reasons beyond just everybody deserves a fair shake and everybody should be treated as equals, that it's not good that we split people into social classes like this, and we want to ignore certain people, and we say this is an okay way to live your life, and this is not an okay way to live your life. And that is, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself when I say this, but I'll go ahead and make this point right now. We put the larger issues as we make the larger issues kind of a allegory for what P.T. Barnum, what Hugh Jackman is going through in his personal life, where he gets to the point where he cares too much about what everyone else thinks about him, and he decides that happiness is about reputation and about gaining everything that you can. And he was right in the first place, because he didn't have anything at the beginning really except for his family, and that's all he ever really wanted in the first place, it turns out. Some of this is typical, some of this is kind of, we've been there and done that before, but I appreciate that it's not just a really general, obvious diversity message. There's a little bit more to it than that. It's that if it's entirely arbitrary and you just do whatever the world tells you you're supposed to do, and you live that way, and you let the world tell you this is what happiness is, this is what you're supposed to want, then you can't possibly be happy. You're not living on your own terms at all, and you're not being true to yourself. And so this is a be true to yourself message. It is a be yourself message. But overall, at the end of the day, I think it's a good one. But back to the point at hand, I think it's really strange when you have this kind of like counterculture message, which is fun in a thing that's like more than 100 years before the counterculture movement of the 80s and 90s, because this is very much about that kind of stuff. You know, the let your freak flag fly kind of thing. The movie itself doesn't do that. It seems like it's trying to be really accessible to a young modern audience that wants to hear the stuff that they're used to hearing on the radio, and I think that's going to date this too much, potentially. And I'm probably barking up the wrong tree for folks that are really into this kind of stuff, because I'm sure that a lot of Broadway kind of sounds like this right now too, because stage musicals tend to do this, where it's kind of whatever's in the air, and they'll go to, I mean, like Hamilton is all, you know, rap and hip hop, and I've not watched the by the way, this made me want to finally sit down and watch that, because it's also on Disney Plus, and I've listened to a lot of music of that, but I've not actually seen the movie version, because at the time that I had a request to review some of the music from that a few years ago, there wasn't a movie version, so I didn't have any way to get a visual component to it. And I partly enjoyed that more just because I guess, I mean, I'm not a huge hip-hop fan, but I guess I like that kind of music more than I like this. And there was a lot of clever turns of phrase and things like that. I got 6 minutes into this movie, and I'll be brutally honest, wanted to turn it off. I wasn't in the mood for this. I don't like this kind of music. This is a lot of the reason that I didn't go to see this movie. And it was a chore initially. I was like, I feel bad, because I know this whole thing is just going to be a subjective exercise of, this is not my bag, I didn't really care for it, sorry. And I didn't feel that way anymore the longer I watched the movie. So I hope you didn't turn the video off before I got to say that part, because that is not my review, and this is not my sign flip. 6 minutes in, I was not having it. And then the roof scene happens, and I start to latch onto it a little bit. And I'm starting to enjoy it kind of like a live-action Disney musical. And I think it's interesting that this movie is now owned by Disney, because what we do with Barnum in this feels really Disney-fied. It feels like this is what Walt Disney, the company, would have done with this material, and it was actually made by Fox. But now Disney owns it, and it's on Disney Plus, so it's really easy to forget that and think of it as a Disney movie, despite the fact that the Fox fanfare opens this film. And so I wonder if down the road there will be people who go back and watch this on Disney Plus and make the mistake of thinking that it's a Disney movie, because it is a Disney movie. They just didn't make it. It really feels that way. So we get that roof scene, and I start to appreciate, despite, again, the typical nature of it, the relationship with Barnum and his wife. His daughters are cute. I'm liking that whole dynamic quite a bit. And then and then he starts to build the museum, and I start to get a little bit engaged in the story. And every time music happens, it interrupts it for me, and I'm going, okay, I'm just going to have to wade through another song to get back to the stuff that I'm interested in, which is the character and thematic stuff. This is a movie that is all about why joy is important, and not losing that in your work. I think my favorite aspect of this, and I don't know if people even talk about this much, but this was the thing I really latched onto, was the kind of ongoing subplot with, and it's few and far between, but with the critic. And it's probably no surprise that I was latching onto that as much as I was, because of what I do, and I tend to always be interested in the way movies deal with review and criticism. But you have a critic, and I think he's played by the guy who played the writer that was penning Frank Underwood's memoirs in House of Cards. I think it's that guy, and I really liked him in that show. And there's this great back and forth between them through the movie, where more and more this critic is starting to understand why the public appreciates what Barnum is doing, even though he doesn't like the show and he doesn't think of it as art. And even at the end, like, he's really dry, he's really deadpan. Perfect casting, by the way, with that actor. And he's like, he finally kind of submits at the end when, and I'm gonna spoil stuff with this, by the way. He submits at the end. Yeah, I still don't like what you do. I still don't enjoy it myself, and I would not be able to write a positive review. But he says, if I was a different reviewer, I can't remember if that's exactly how he puts it, but he's like, another critic, or if I felt differently, might call what you're doing a celebration of humanity. And again, in the actual history of all of this, I don't know how I would feel about that if we were trying to be really accurate with what really happened. But within the context of this fiction and this version of Barnum, I like that a lot. And there's a whole transformation with the critic where early on he absolutely hates the circus and the show, and you have this line from Barnum which really stuck with me, where he goes, because the reason the critic hates it is because he thinks that it's all fake. He says, "How do you?" This is real early in the movie, 15-20 minutes in. He goes, "How do you feel about how all of the success you're having comes from being a fraud, being fake?" And Barnum's response, which is wonderfully written, is, I don't know, how fake is it that a theater critic can't get any joy out of the theater? The whole thing is about joy. I think that's great. This movie is all about fakeness and what that really means, and the relationship that has to happiness and what that means. So Barnum's whole character arc here is about what he really wants versus what he thinks he wants. So he thinks he wants a good reputation. He thinks he has something to prove to the world because he grew up downtrodden and without very much, and at the low end of the social ladder, and also is kind of a class clown type. And nobody thought he would make anything of himself. And his in-laws hate him because their daughter, again, real typical kind of class warfare stuff, their daughter married lower than her station, and so he has something to prove. And when he finally proves it, it's not, he doesn't feel like it's enough for anybody, because, okay, yeah, now he's really wealthy, and he's got a mansion, and he's got to meet the Queen of England, etc., but people still look at him like they looked at Stan Lee in the 60s when he would tell people that he was a writer. Stan Lee talks about this in some interviews. He goes, people would ask me, what do you do at, like, cocktail parties, high society stuff? What do you do for a living? I'm a writer. What do you write? Ugh, I don't want to answer that question, because now they're going to look at me differently. Now I am successful, but I'm still not one of them. And Barnum feels like he'll never be one of them. And the more he tries at that, the less joy he's taking in his own work, and the more he's having to treat his family and his friends differently and as below him. And he's losing sight of the ball and what it's all about. And the crux of all that comes from the relationship with the critic, and I like that a lot. I think I appreciate. Now I'm just analyzing theme a lot. I appreciate the story of this movie and performances, I think, more than I do this as a musical. But that's not to say I never enjoyed the music at all. Some of it started to win me over a little bit as I adjusted to it, I think. My favorite... So... I'll go ahead and tell you what my favorite song was, but I think my favorite piece in the movie as a song is different than my favorite number as a performance. So the best song to me was I think, come alive, because that was more of like 80s Michael Jackson-esque pop number, and I just like that kind of music more. I mean, like, what do you want from me? Some of this is subjective, like it's just a some of it is just a taste issue, but I thought that was a little bit more earwormy. I thought that style fit really well for what that song was all about, and that montage. A lot of these songs are montages. A lot of it is we start in one place, and then by the end of the song, some time has passed. And I think that's one of those. And then after that, though, and I think it was probably the very next song. This wasn't, again, my favorite song, although I think I enjoyed it more than a lot of the rest of it. But The Other Side, because the choreography in that, particularly in the parts in the bar with Barnum and Philip Carlyle, who becomes his partner, where they're negotiating, and like he's trying to win Carlyle over. He's a playwright who's clearly just like Barnum gets to later. He's a guy who is successful but not happy, and he just feels like he's doing the same thing all the time, and like he's just trying to impress people that he really doesn't care that much about impressing, and also I should mention that this movie is about the ways in which taking risks is a lot of what keeps us going and keeps us motivated. That risk taking is also a big part of happiness, and playing it safe is a big thing that a lot of the high society people tend to do. They don't take a lot of chances on anything. They're not deep thinkers. They're not open-minded. That's part of the reason that they look down on other social classes, and they're not and they don't take chances for anything. They're not out-of-the-box thinkers either. But anyway, all that stuff in the bar where first he's trying to win Carlyle over, and then they're negotiating payment and stuff, with, like, the MVP of that whole thing is the bartender. The way he's, like, throwing around glasses and bottles and putting stuff on the table, and the way that, like dropping things and putting things down becomes part of the percussion of the piece. I love that stuff, and that whole thing was really exciting to me. Like, that was the best part of the whole spectacle for me, was that bit. And there's a couple scenes before that where Burnham and his daughters are nailing up flyers for the museum, and they're rhythmically hammering things in, and I thought we were about to get like a Music Man-esque sequence, like the train song in the Music Man, and then it never turns into a song, and I was a little bit disappointed for a minute, and then we do that again with The Other Side, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, this is what I was waiting for. That does end up happening. So there was some stuff with the musical portion of it that I did find myself finally enjoying and being won over. This is not a soundtrack I would listen to independently from this, and I did feel sometimes like the music got in the way a little bit for me, and I know I'm probably massively in the minority on that. But again, I was distracted by the anachronism, and I don't think that that's inherently a bad idea. I just thought that because again, I don't think it's bad with Hamilton, but I think, like, thematically, it is, again, just really weird to have a movie to have a story that's all about going your own way, being your own person, taking risks, and then the movie itself doesn't take a lot, and that was a little bit unsettling for me. The other thing that I thought was really weird in the production side, and this is kind of minor, but I kind of thought that there was going to be a lot more throwback to old Hollywood and the way movies were made at the turn of the century, because at the beginning of the movie you get the old school Fox fanfare. It doesn't do the entire fanfare. I'm not sure why that is, but it does. But it does, like, 5 seconds of it, and then it immediately goes into an intertitle, like from the silent film era, and puts the old, like, frilly border around it. And it only does that at the beginning and end to bookend it, and it never goes to that place again, and it never, like, tries to make any part of the movie like old Hollywood. So I wasn't sure why that was there and what the point of that was, because this is a play. It's not, I mean, it's a movie, but it's doing a lot more stuff with Broadway than it is with film, so that seemed real tacked on, and I wasn't sure it was appropriate for the material, unless there's just something I'm not thinking of that I'm missing. I probably should have already flipped green, because at the end of the day, I did really enjoy this, and I am really glad that I saw it. I don't think I enjoyed it for a lot of reasons that some other people do, but I think Hugh Jackman sells it brilliantly. He is simultaneously playing a completely different kind of role than I've ever seen him play, but also there are snippets of the really, like, intense and and of the really intense attitude and the temper that you get from something like a Wolverine, particularly like just glimpses of it, which I think really gives his performance a lot of layers, and makes this character more than one note. Where, particularly in the scene where they're at the party and his wife's parents come in, and his father and her father finally tells him that he has made something of himself, and Hugh Jackman hates these people and is angry to see them, and that it took this long for them to begin to support him. And I liked how reserved that scene was. He could have just lost it and gone crazy, and I kind of thought that he was going to be like Bruce Wayne in The Party in Batman Begins, except there, Christian Bale is pretending to be drunk and to tell everybody off. But I kind of thought we were going to do like a more earnest version of that, and it isn't that, but he goes far enough that you just see this glimmer of rage. And I thought that was wonderful, and that was the moment where I went, okay, Hugh Jackman is probably the only person to play this role, I say that with the possible exception of like a Colin Farrell, because I did see some glimpses of the performance something like the performance that Colin Farrell was giving in a movie that I've already referenced, Saving Mr. Banks, where he plays, I forget her name, but the author of the Pooh books, her father, and he has a similar situation to Hugh Jackman's character at the beginning, except he never really improves his stature, where he's in the bank and he gets really drunk, and he he publicly humiliates himself and ends up losing everything. I think given that performance, that guy probably could have also played this role, maybe. But Jackman is brilliant. I was really impressed with Zendaya in this. She plays one of the misfits that is in the circus. Is she supposed to be a trapeze artist? Because all we really see her do is swing around on ropes a lot, and I wasn't sure if she actually was on the trapeze or if she just swung around on ropes. But I had never actually heard her sing. I know she's a singer. I know that's her first big thing, and I never actually heard her sing before. And yeah, she's got a great voice. But she's also, I've always thought, a really good actress, and she brings some of the stuff to this that I think she does with Spider-Man, particularly in the romance stuff. I like the paralleling subplots, and paralleling what am I trying to say? Interpersonal relationships between Barnum and his wife and her character, Anne Wheeler, with Philip Carlyle. So they want to be together, but Philip is, of course, at a higher social stature, and people want to ignore anyone of color, and so they can't be together. And I really like, by the way, that we don't go too far at the end of this. And I guess this is easier because even though we take a lot of creative liberties, this is a historical piece, so you wouldn't buy it if all of a sudden P.T. Barnum at the end of this movie got everybody to be like more open-minded and saw everyone as equals. Like, we weren't gonna buy that happening, but I still feel the need to give it props for having consequences for that relationship, and making it very, very difficult for them, even though they do come together at the end. And it ultimately takes him almost dying in a fire because he thought she was in the building when protesters who don't like the misfits, the freaks, when they burn the building down. It takes that before they're actually able to be together. They go back and forth the whole movie. Like there's a scene where you have, after Barnum brings Jenny to the States and has her sing. And that whole thing is interesting. I'll try to talk about that for a second here in a minute, if I remember to. But she sings her song on stage, and in kind of a like CW dramatic way. I didn't love this because it just wasn't very subtle about it. It was like, yeah, I get what's going on, and you guys are acting like there's so much subtext, but it's like, duh. We keep like closing in on people's faces and how they're feeling while Jenny is singing this song. And one of those things is those two, Anne and Philip, like finally like beginning to hold hands. And once I think one of his parents sees that, he draws away, and then she leaves. And then later on, he tries to take her to the theater. He tries to make up for that and change her mind about him and about being with him. And then they very conveniently pass his parents in the hallway just as they're starting to walk in, and she runs off because she's not going to be accepted. And they have a big song about it. A lot of the stunt work in this movie is in that one scene where Zendaya is having to sing while she's swinging around like Tarzan, and then you get to the end of that scene and she walks away, and then finally they're able to or they decide to be together, I should say, after he almost dies in a fire, thinking that he's going to rescue her, and then at the hospital, they're making out, and everyone around them is appalled and can't believe that they're looking at this like mixed race relationship. And I like that there continue to be consequences, and that's not going to be easy, and they're not going to be accepted. And it's the same thing with Hugh Jackman, or with Bailey, or, sorry, not Bailey, with Barnum. Bailey, of course, is not referenced in this because that would happen decades after this, when those two circuses would come together. But anyway, so Barnum is also never going to be fully accepted, and he finally realizes that, and at the end, he pulls both of his families back together. He almost loses everything, and the things that really matter to him, that he really cares about. And he has this line that I think would be really easy to misinterpret as being kind of wrong and messed up, where he goes, where he tells his wife, I tried to be more than I am, which is not, I don't think, the movie saying know your place. There are a couple characters that say things like that through the movie, and the movie very clearly frowns on that sentiment. It isn't know your place, it's you can be anything you want to be, but the world is not always going to accept you, and you don't have to live on the world's terms. But that doesn't mean that you can completely change the world all by yourself. Like, he was not always going to be able to do things like go see the Queen and be on top and everybody worships the ground he walks on, by pushing against boundaries. It just wasn't going to work that way. It takes time to change the closed-minded people and the overall status quo of a world that operates that way. And so by the end, so I think when he says that, what he means by I tried to be more than I am is I tried to be something that I'm not, and I thought I wanted things I don't actually want. What the riches weren't really important. It was sad that he couldn't buy his daughter ballet shoes, but if she'd never gotten the ballet shoes, but she always got time with her father, she would have been happy, and she would have always understood that, and she wouldn't have grown up resenting him for not having ballet shoes. She may have grown up and resented him for going off and gallivanting all around the country with a woman that wasn't her mother, to give her ballet shoes and everything else she ever wanted, but for him to never be there. And so that's ultimately, I think, the point of that the Jenny thing is interesting for a couple reasons. I like that when she's on stage, I guess I just think it's interesting when she's on stage. She's singing another of these really modern kind of pop ballads, and I imagine that's not what the characters in the fiction are actually listening to. Uh, and the way that's played is kind of fun. Where because I wondered how they would handle that, if it would be more of a period song, because now it's not people in the fiction suddenly breaking into song and sounding like our music now, but rather people in an audience listening to them. But to be consistent, they still make it that same kind of music. And I imagine that when just something about the way it plays, when she stops singing and everyone applauds and they start saying, more like brava and stuff, more period kinds of phrases. Not that everybody talks exactly like they would then. We don't have a lot of modern slang and things like that, but we take some creative license, and I think that the movie finds a really good middle ground on this. For instance, his little girls say things like "awesome." You wouldn't have used the word "awesome" in that context back then. That's a much more modern thing, and but I think it finds a good balance for that. But I thought it was kind of fun that she is, at least the way I was interpreting it, that I had to kind of imagine what maybe they were hearing when I was hearing a very modern, 2010s kind of pop ballad. I like that Barnum, and I don't know what the actual, real history is of this, but I like the fact that Barnum doesn't actually have an affair with her, but that he basically has initially the consequences of an affair, except he's able to convince his wife that to be with him again. And he doesn't actually have to convince her that they never got together and slept together or anything. I think she either inherently understands that, or I guess thinks they can move past it when you get to the end. She's more reasonable than I expected her to be with that whole thing. But what I like about all of that, I just think that he would have been probably way, way too unsympathetic if he had gone that far, and it would have been more typical, because it would have been the big thing that would have made it feel more like a rock star kind of biopic, because it hits a lot of those beats, and that would have been the big clincher. I kind of like that it doesn't go that far. I kind of like that it's more of a almost blackmail scenario where she wants him. I question the timing of this. I will say that, where she thinks he's been leading her on, and they've been on tour for a long time, and they've never had a conversation about this, and they've never had that moment where they almost made out until they have the most successful night on stage they've had. And I thought that was a little contrived and a little too easy. But what I like about the whole thing is that he is only using her in the first place for her reputation. And the whole movie is about how reputation is not the most important thing, and you can't base anything on that. People shouldn't get credibility just because everyone else likes them. That's not right, and that's not fair. I don't think you can trust that. And so I think part of the reason he has to pay for all of this is because he brings her aboard just based on reputation. He never hears her sing. And he's letting the high society tell him how to live his life and what's important, and that's part of all of that too. So I really like that. I also like the idea that accidentally, because I don't think he planned it this way in the first place, but I like the idea that his circus is in a way actually one of the most real things on Earth, even though he fibs a lot, and he there is trickery and a sense of being hoodwinked in there. We do talk about how the question of, do people know they're being hoodwinked? Barnum assumes that a lot of people go there because they know it's fake and they don't care. It's like in a magic act. It's like they want to believe it even if it isn't real. So I like that, but in a way it's more real than anything, because that celebration of humanity idea, he is putting on display people of every kind of from every color and size and walk of life, etc., etc. And what's really fake is that high society mentality of we're all that matters. Let's pretend like nothing else is there, and these really arbitrary standards of things where we're on top, so that's why we're great, and that's it. And it's like, have you ever accomplished anything? Did you ever like? So many people, there's got to be so much old money in all of that it's like your stature is again completely arbitrary. It just comes from who your parents were, where you were born, what your bloodline is. Oh, that's really impressive. You were born with blood of rich people. Okay, great, but these people are actually talented at something, or there's something unusual and interesting about them. And so by the end, I think a lot of the idea is suggesting that it's the it's like the cream of the crop that's actually the or what's considered the cream of the crop, the high society people, that they're actually the real frauds. And Barnum has accidentally created the most real thing there is, because you couldn't see those people before. You couldn't really associate with them. So anyway, like I said, at the end of the day, I'm feeling it. I had a real interesting metamorphosis with this movie. I was not enjoying myself at the beginning, and then it finally won me over. Well, I shouldn't even say finally. Pretty quickly it won me over. So that's good. I forgot to mention at the beginning, I don't think I mentioned this, that this was requested by Snuffles Writes. So thanks very much to her. She is a big fan of musicals and Broadway and that kind of thing, so not surprising that she brought this to me. I'm glad I finally saw this. My sister, of all people, I think it's the only review she's ever done on the channel, reviewed this with Eric several years ago, or I guess in 2017, when this came out, and I didn't end up seeing it even after that. So now I finally talked about it, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm already 40 minutes in, so that's all I'm going to say about it today. And if you would like to request something for review in this format, either a movie or a comic miniseries, a graphic novel or something, feel free to join the $15 tier on Patreon. That's patreon.com/geekvolution, and you can enter there for just 1 month and let that roll over, and then you'll get your request in the queue. Just let me know there on Patreon what you'd like. Just send me a message there, and that'll give me a direct email. And then you don't have to stay at that tier past that first month, even though it will be a while before, it'll be several weeks before you get your review, because we have several people at that tier right now. And at the moment, it's about a 3 to 4 month wait, but it may be a little bit longer because I'm probably going to have to take a hiatus after my twins are born, and I just don't know how long I'm going to have to be gone during that. So please be patient with me if you do decide to do a request, and if you want to stay at that tier, that will keep you in the rotation, and that's awesome for anybody that's done that. You guys are wonderful. Thanks so much for the support, but don't feel like you have to do it that way, because you, of course, won't get a review monthly. I just don't have the time to do it that often. I'm averaging once a week right now. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Really appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of this movie and Hugh Jackman's performance, etc., etc. And I will see you again with lots more stuff here on Geekvolution. I was Captain Logan, and thanks for watching. Bye, folks.